What unfolds when a widely admired Hollywood star walks into what should be an ordinary morning talk show appearance, only to realize he has become the target of a host intent on stirring controversy at his expense? The situation quickly turns into one of the most startling moments ever seen on daytime television, where courtesy collides with hostility, and even someone known for playing a fierce superhero finds himself caught in an unexpected trap. The atmosphere shifts from friendly to tense in a matter of moments, leaving everyone watching stunned by how quickly things spiral. He stepped onto the set that morning wearing his familiar warm expression, greeting the audience as they responded with loud applause. He had appeared on the program many times before, always maintaining a reputation as polite, engaging, and easygoing. Producers appreciated having him on because he was dependable, handled interviews smoothly, and never created uncomfortable situations. Everything about his presence suggested another pleasant segment was about to unfold. Yet there was an undercurrent in the air that day. One of the hosts seemed to carry a different energy, something sharper and less welcoming than usual. So, as the introductions wrapped up, she greeted him with a smile that didn't quite match her tone. He responded kindly, unaware that the conversation was about to veer far from expectations. The other panelists exchanged subtle looks, sensing something unusual, but unable to predict how far it would go. The host began by acknowledging his latest project, but quickly shifted direction. Her voice changed slightly, signaling a move away from the planned discussion. She brought up rumors surrounding his private life, implying that there were questions the audience supposedly deserved answers to. The sudden pivot caught him off guard. He had prepared for standard topics. His work, perhaps a few light personal anecdotes, but nothing remotely controversial. He tried to clarify what she meant, maintaining composure despite the surprise. Meanwhile, she leaned forward, clearly determined to press the issue. She referenced circulating gossip about his marriage, hinting at unconventional arrangements and inviting him to address them directly. The room fell silent, almost instantly. What had been a cheerful environment moments earlier now felt tense and uncertain. His demeanor shifted. The relaxed smile faded, replaced by a controlled seriousness. It was clear he was uncomfortable, yet he remained measured in his response. He stated that he preferred to focus on the reason he had been invited and avoided engaging with vague rumors. His tone was calm but carried a noticeable firmness. Rather than easing off, the host doubled down. She framed her approach as straightforward honesty, suggesting that public figures should expect such scrutiny. According to her, fans were entitled to know the truth about someone they admired. Another panelist attempted to intervene gently, hinting that the conversation might be going too far, but the attempt was quickly dismissed. The host continued, questioning whether his public image as a devoted family man was genuine or carefully constructed. The accusation hung heavily in the air. He appeared less shocked now and more disappointed, as though struggling to process how the situation had escalated so abruptly. This wasn't a challenging interview in the usual sense. It felt personal, almost accusatory. He finally interrupted, his voice still controlled, but carrying a sharper edge. He pointed out that he had agreed to appear on the show in good faith, expecting a professional discussion about his work. The host responded dismissively, insisting she was simply raising questions already circulating and framing it as part of her role. That response seemed to ignite something in him. For the first time, there was unmistakable intensity in his voice. He challenged the idea that repeating rumors qualified as responsible journalism, emphasizing that real reporting required evidence, effort, and integrity. What was happening, he suggested, felt more like spreading gossip than seeking truth. By this point, the audience was completely silent, unsure how to react. What they had expected to be an entertaining segment had transformed into an uncomfortable confrontation, unfolding in real time. Another host suggested cutting to a break, hoping to diffuse the situation, but the idea was brushed aside. The insistence on continuing only heightened the tension. Turning back to him, the host implied that his reluctance to answer was itself suspicious. The suggestion was clear. If there was nothing to hide, why not respond directly? That remark seemed to mark a turning point. He slowly rose from his seat, gripping the chair tightly, his emotions visible, despite his effort to remain composed. When he spoke again, His voice was quieter, but carried across the studio with clarity. He pointed out that the invitation had been presented under entirely different pretenses. His team had been told the discussion would center on his work and positive topics, not speculative claims about his personal life. What had been framed as a friendly conversation now felt like a deliberate setup. For a brief moment, the host's confidence appeared to falter, but she quickly regained her footing, insisting she was only doing her job. That explanation didn't seem to satisfy him. There was a sense of frustration not just at the questions themselves, but at the manner in which they were introduced, without context, without evidence, and without regard for boundaries. The exchange left a heavy atmosphere in the studio. What began as a routine appearance had transformed into a confrontation that blurred the line between inquiry and intrusion. The tension lingered, with neither side willing to fully step back, and the audience witnessing a moment that would be remembered far beyond that single broadcast. Your role is supposed to engage and educate viewers, not tear individuals down by repeating rumors and guesswork. He remained on his feet, towering over the table, and the tension on his face revealed a clear inner conflict. This was someone who had spent years navigating the spotlight, handling interviews, premieres, and public scrutiny with composure and courtesy. Yet the situation unfolding now was different. A boundary had been crossed, one that tested even his well-known patience. He took a breath and addressed her again, his voice growing steadier and more forceful. He asked whether there was any real proof behind the claims she was so eager to discuss. Were there credible sources, verifiable facts, anything concrete at all? Or was she simply echoing whatever sensational headlines she had come across casually without considering their accuracy? The question hung in the air, sharp and direct. Around the table, the discomfort was unmistakable. The other hosts could no longer hide their unease. One shook her head subtly, another avoided eye contact entirely, while a third appeared as though she wished she could disappear from the moment altogether. Despite the visible tension, the host at the center of it all seemed almost energized, leaning further into the confrontation rather than pulling back. She insisted that the evidence was obvious, pointing vaguely to public appearances, perceived body language, and the timing of events. According to her, people could draw their own conclusions from what they observed. He responded immediately, challenging that claim. What exactly were people seeing? A couple choosing to keep parts of their relationship private? Two individuals who didn't feel the need to display every aspect of their lives for public approval? Was that what was being interpreted as suspicious? She leaned back, appearing satisfied with the direction the exchange had taken. To her, his reaction itself seemed telling. She suggested that if everything were as stable as he claimed, there would be no reason to react so strongly. Why not simply brush it aside with humor? That suggestion triggered a bitter response. He pointed out the absurdity of expecting him to laugh while his personal life was being questioned in front of millions, based on nothing more than speculation. He made it clear that the discussion wasn't just about him. It involved his partner, his family, people who had not chosen to be part of this narrative and certainly hadn't agreed to be scrutinized by someone who didn't know them. The idea that he should treat it lightly struck him as deeply unreasonable. She attempted to defend herself, claiming she wasn't attacking anyone but merely asking questions relevant to a public figure. Yet her words lacked the same confidence they had earlier. His voice wavered briefly, not with weakness but with emotion, as he rejected her characterization. There was nothing legitimate about the line of questioning, he insisted. What was legitimate, he continued, was the life he had built over decades. A long-standing marriage, children who cared deeply for both their parents, and a partner who had stood beside him through every success and setback. That, he emphasized, was real, not the narrative being constructed in that moment. The audience was fully absorbed now, watching the exchange unfold with a mix of shock and fascination. Some nodded in agreement, clearly moved by his words, while others seemed stunned by the intensity. A few had already begun recording, aware that the moment was unusual, something that would likely be replayed and discussed long after the broadcast ended. Still, the host refused to retreat. Instead, she dismissed his response as eloquent but insufficient, arguing that emotional statements did not address the underlying claims. She repeated that rumors persisted and suggested they must originate from somewhere. That implication pushed the situation to its breaking point. His hand came down on the table with a force that startled everyone, the sound cutting through the studio like a sudden crack. He raised his voice, no longer willing to tolerate the direction of the conversation. The shift was dramatic. The calm, measured presence he was known for gave way to visible frustration. He declared that he was finished with the discussion, finished engaging with the accusations, and finished with the exchange altogether. The statement carried a finality that left no room for misunderstanding. Even then, she attempted to provoke further, questioning whether he intended to walk away and framing it as unprofessional. She implied that leaving was a sign of avoiding difficult questions. He turned back, and the expression on his face reflected someone who had reached his limit. It wasn't anger alone. It was a mix of disappointment and resolve, the look of someone determined to defend himself after being pushed too far. He addressed the accusation directly, repeating her words before responding. He pointed out that his career had spanned decades, during which he had faced challenging interviews and serious questions from experienced journalists. He had handled criticism and scrutiny from those who approached their work with knowledge and integrity. What was happening now, he argued, was something entirely different. This, he said, was not meaningful inquiry or professional questioning. It was harshness disguised as curiosity, an attempt to provoke rather than understand. He made it clear that he would not accept being treated that way. One of the other hosts finally stepped in, suggesting that everyone pause and regain some perspective. But he continued, determined to clarify the situation. He explained that the invitation had been presented under false assumptions. His team had been assured the conversation would focus on his projects and positive topics. Instead, he found himself confronted with baseless claims about his personal life. When he attempted to steer the discussion back to appropriate ground, the approach only intensified. His words carried weight, not just because of their content, but because of the composure he had maintained for so long before reaching that point. The contrast between his usual demeanor and the current moment made the impact even stronger. Across the table, the reaction was dismissive, but the atmosphere in the room had already shifted irreversibly, leaving a sense that something significant had just taken place. "Oh, come on, don't make this bigger than it is," she said dismissively. "I only asked a few questions. If that's too much for you, maybe this industry isn't the right place." Her tone carried a mix of sarcasm and challenge, as though the entire situation were trivial. He looked at her in disbelief, repeating her words as if trying to process them. "A few questions." His voice reflected a mixture of shock and frustration. He pointed out that what she described as simple questioning had gone far beyond that. She had openly suggested that his marriage was fabricated, that his relationship was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion for public consumption. She had cast doubt on his honesty, his values, and his character, all without presenting a single piece of credible evidence. That, he made clear, was not harmless curiosity. It was an attack. The atmosphere in the studio became almost unbearable. Conversations among the crew turned into hushed murmurs, with uncertainty about whether the broadcast should continue uninterrupted. The audience sat motionless, many clearly siding with him based on their expressions. The tension wasn't just visible. It felt heavy, pressing down on everyone present. Sensing that the mood was shifting against her, she attempted to soften her stance. Her voice lost some of its earlier sharpness as she tried to reframe the situation. She acknowledged that he was upset, but insisted that this was part of being a public figure. People talk, they speculate, they question. According to her, it was simply the reality of fame. It was, she argued, something that came with the territory. He repeated her phrase quietly, almost as if testing its meaning. The price of fame. His tone had changed, becoming calmer but edged with intensity. He explained that he was no stranger to public attention. He had lived under scrutiny for years and understood that curiosity about his life was inevitable. Rumors and gossip were nothing new to him. What he struggled to accept, however, was why someone in her position would choose to give those rumors credibility instead of using her platform responsibly. He emphasized that there was a difference between acknowledging public interest and actively fueling baseless narratives. Instead, she had chosen to highlight speculation that had no foundation, effectively amplifying it to a wider audience. Another host attempted once more to steer the conversation back to safer ground, suggesting they return to discussing his latest project. The suggestion hung briefly in the air, offering a possible way out of the escalating tension. But he shook his head, unwilling to move forward, as if nothing had happened. He apologized briefly, but made it clear that continuing under those circumstances was not an option. He explained that he couldn't sit there and pretend the exchange had been acceptable. The direction of the conversation had already crossed into territory that he found inappropriate and disrespectful. It was evident to him that the discussion was no longer about his work or anything positive. Instead, it had become something else entirely, something he was not willing to participate in. Her reaction was immediate, her frustration resurfacing. She accused him of walking away, framing it as avoidance. There was a note of disappointment in her voice, but it carried an edge meant to provoke. She implied that she had expected more resilience from him, suggesting that leaving showed a lack of strength. He paused, holding her gaze for a moment before responding. When he spoke, his voice was steady, controlled, and firm. There was no hesitation in his words. "Ho!" He addressed her comment directly, turning the idea of strength back toward her. To him, strength meant standing up for those who mattered when they were being unfairly targeted. It meant refusing to take part in situations designed to harm others for the sake of entertainment. It also meant recognizing when a situation had become toxic and choosing to step away, rather than enabling it. As he spoke, he began removing his microphone, his movements calm and deliberate despite the tension around him. He added that walking away from something harmful did not indicate weakness. In fact, it required clarity and resolve, qualities that were often mistaken for something else entirely. Entirely! She watched him closely, and for a brief moment her expression shifted. Whether it was doubt, concern, or the realization of how far things had gone, it was difficult to tell. There may have been an awareness that the situation had reached a point where it could have consequences beyond the studio. Poop. Still, she wasn't willing to let the moment end without one more remark. As he turned to leave, she called out after him, a voice cutting through the silence. She suggested that perhaps the rumors held some truth after all, implying that his reaction somehow validated them. The comment carried a sharpness that immediately changed the atmosphere yet again. He stopped mid-step. The entire room seemed to freeze, as if everyone sensed that the moment had taken another serious turn. Even the smallest movement ceased, attention fixed entirely on what would happen next. Slowly, he turned back toward her. The expression on his face was unlike anything seen before in that setting. It wasn't just frustration. It was something deeper, colder, more controlled, yet more intense. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost quiet, but it carried clearly across the room. He asked her to repeat what she had said, the question simple yet loaded with meaning. She appeared to hesitate, her earlier confidence wavering slightly. Realizing that she might have crossed an even more serious line, she attempted to soften her statement. She suggested that perhaps he could have handled the situation differently, offering it as a vague justification rather than a direct repetition of her remark. "Oh no," he said firmly, as he stepped back toward the table, closing the distance again. "That's not what you said." His tone was controlled but unmistakably intense. He repeated her words clearly, leaving no room for reinterpretation. She had suggested that the rumors about his marriage might be true, implied that his relationship could be nothing more than an act, and dismissed his defense of his wife as weak. Now he stood directly in front of her, his presence commanding, his posture unwavering. He asked if that was truly what she wanted to stand by publicly. The rest of the panel sat frozen. One host looked as though she wished she could vanish entirely. Another clutched her cue cards so tightly they began to bend, and a third stared in stunned disbelief at what was unfolding. A quiet attempt was made to calm the situation, urging him to sit down, but he didn't move. He insisted that the host finish what she had started, pointing out that she seemed to have plenty to say about his personal life, his partner, and his character. If she had opinions, he told her, she should share them openly. Her confidence, so steady before, now appeared shaken. She had likely expected him to leave quietly, to absorb the criticism and exit without pushing back. Instead, he had returned with resolve. She tried to regain control, suggesting he was overreacting, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. His response came in the form of a short, humorless laugh. He began speaking about his wife, not defensively, but with conviction. He described her as intelligent, accomplished, and selfless. He spoke of how she had set aside her own ambitions to support his career, how she had raised their children while he spent long periods away working, and how she had remained by his side through both success and failure. Every achievement and every setback, she had been there. His words carried weight, growing stronger and more passionate with each sentence. He contrasted that reality with what was happening in the studio. Sitting comfortably and speculating about someone else's life, he argued, did not give anyone the right to question the authenticity of a decades-long relationship. He challenged the basis of her claims, pointing out that they were rooted in nothing more than gossip, assumptions, and a desire to create drama where none existed. She attempted to interrupt, insisting that she hadn't directly criticized his wife. He immediately pushed back, clarifying that questioning the validity of their entire relationship inherently affected everyone involved. He emphasized that what she had suggested reduced years of commitment, partnership, and shared life to nothing more than a staged performance. It implied that not only he, but also his partner and their children were part of some elaborate deception. The audience remained completely silent, fully absorbed in what was being said. This wasn't simply an uncomfortable interview anymore, it was something deeper. It was a person standing up for his family, for the life he had built, and for values he refused to see diminished. His voice lowered again, quieter but carrying a sharp intensity, as he continued. He pointed out what he saw as the deeper issue. With a platform that reached millions, she had the ability to influence, to encourage, to bring attention to meaningful topics. Instead, she had chosen to spread doubt and suspicion. Rather than highlighting positive stories or celebrating genuine connections, she had focused on undermining them. That choice, he implied, said more than any rumor ever could. By now, her demeanor had changed noticeably. The confidence that had fueled her earlier remarks was gone, replaced by uncertainty and discomfort. She tried to justify herself, repeating that she was simply doing her job, but the words came out weaker this time. He shook his head, clearly unconvinced. He questioned what kind of job involved damaging reputations without evidence, spreading insinuations, and causing harm to people who had done nothing to deserve it. He paused briefly, studying her expression, before suggesting that if that was truly how she defined her role, perhaps it was worth reconsidering entirely. Another host quietly called for assistance, but he responded calmly that it wouldn't be necessary. He made it clear he was leaving, but before doing so, he wanted to address everyone watching. Turning toward the camera, he spoke directly to the audience, his tone steady and deliberate. He stated that what had just taken place should not be mistaken for journalism, or even entertainment. In his view, it was something far simpler and far more troubling. It was an example of someone using influence to target another person without justification. He described it as an abuse of power, plain and clear. Then he turned back to her, who now sat visibly diminished, her earlier assertiveness replaced by a subdued stillness. He told her to remember the moment, to recall what it felt like to be confronted about her actions. He expressed hope that the experience might lead to reflection before engaging in similar behavior again. The studio was silent, the stillness almost overwhelming. He adjusted his jacket, ran a hand through his hair, and began walking toward the exit. Just as he neared the edge of the stage, she called out again, attempting to challenge his decision to leave. She pointed out that the broadcast was still live, and suggested his departure was unprofessional. He stopped briefly and turned back one final time. A faint smile appeared, but it carried none of the warmth he was known for. He responded by reflecting on his career, noting that he had consistently approached his work with respect and patience, even in difficult situations. However, he added that professionalism also meant recognizing when not to participate in something that crossed a line. He glanced at the other hosts, offering a brief apology that they had been caught in the middle of the situation, acknowledging that they deserved better circumstances. Then, without further hesitation, he left the set. What remained behind was a stunned audience, and a moment that lingered in the air long after he had gone. The weight of what had happened settled slowly, the realization spreading through the room as the cameras continued recording. When the broadcast finally shifted away, the impact had already taken hold, leaving behind an exchange that would be discussed and analyzed far beyond that single moment.